Hi, welcome to another Unity 5 tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a mobile markerless augmented reality application using the Wikitude plugin. Augmented reality is making 3D virtual objects look as though they're in the real-world environment by overlaying these objects onto a video feed. This in and of itself is rather easy. The difficulty occurs when you want the 3D object to move relative to the perspective of the video feed. Initially, to achieve this, a printed marker was placed into the video feed. An image recognition algorithm searches the video until it finds the marker. It then tracks key locations. How these locations change in relative position to one another are used to calculate the perspective at which to display a virtual object. Using this method, translation, rotation, and scaling can be determined. With increases in computer processing power, the algorithms have become more powerful and able to find and track their own key locations from live video. One method for achieving this is called SLAM, or Simultaneous Localization and Mapping. In this tutorial, we're going to use the Wikitude SLAM plugin for Unity to create our own augmented reality, very simple zombie game. Now, before we can start work in Unity, we need to download the Wikitude SDK. If you go to wikitude.com/download, you'll then find a list of all the different tools that we can get hold of. And down through the list, near the bottom, you'll find this one for Unity. So grab yourself a copy of that and download it. In addition to the Unity download, you'll also need a key. Now, if we go to the developer link at the top, you'll find a link to licenses here. If you select that, it will then ask you to create an account, which I've already done. So you can see that I go straight to the licenses area. After you've created your free account and logged in, you'll then come to this licenses area where you can get a free key, which is this first one here. And if you click on download key, it will download a text file, and inside that text file, if I just open this up quickly and show you, you'll see this, which is going to be your free key that you use. So keep a hold of that text file, and I'll show you where to insert this key in a bit. Now that you've got the SDK and the license key, you can open up Unity and create a new scene. Now this is the default scene, and take the SDK that you just downloaded, it should be zipped up, and drag and drop it into the assets folder in project, and Unity will unzip it automatically for you. It will then organize the Wikitude content into a number of different folders. I've got a few extra folders here because I've already added some extra assets that we'll be using, but you'll see this Wikitude folder, and that's the main one that we will be working with. Now, once you've got that going, in your new scene, we're going to replace the default main camera with the Wikitude camera. So select the main camera from the hierarchy and delete that. And then in this Wikitude folder in assets, go down to the prefab folder and then find the camera and drag and drop that prefab into the hierarchy. And that will add in a camera for you, and it will have the special script attached to it. And if you have a look at that in the inspector, you'll find the spot where you need to put the license key. So open up that text file with the license key and copy and paste the contents into here. So I'll just put in mine. Mine's going to be different to yours because I've got a different key, but it should still work the same. All of the other settings, you can leave them as default. Now, I should have probably mentioned this before, but the application that we're creating is for a mobile device. So this won't work on your desktop machine. You'll need an Android device or an iOS device. And if you have a look at the title that I have in my window, you'll see I've already got it set to Android. So what you will have to do is to go into the build settings under File in Unity and then select, let's just come over here, select Android or iOS and make sure that you switch to that particular platform. You'll also need to put in your bundle ID as well, which is under player settings. And if you have a look in my playlist on YouTube for my mobile tutorials. The very first ones actually show you how to set up for a mobile platform. So in player settings, you would come over here and you would add in your publishing settings and other settings here, which is going to have your bundle ID. Now this is really important when you want to start to build out to your application, because I guess it's a separate issue from using the Wikitude. It's just a process that you have to go through for building mobile. So have a look at those other tutorials if you haven't built to mobile before, because I'm not going to go through all the details in this one. Okay, so we've got our Wikitude camera. We now need to add in our tracker, and that will be down in the prefabs of Wikitude folder again, and find the instant tracker. Grab that and drag and drop it. You'll notice that it's got a child attached to it called Trackable, and make sure that that is also in the scene. The way that you communicate with this AR plugin is via this instant tracker and the Trackable. If you have a closer look at what's actually in the instant tracker in the inspector, you can see that it has links ready for any events that occur. So there's an on targets loaded, there's an error loaded, and there's a state changed for the tracker. And in the Trackable, there's a enter field of vision and an exit field of vision. So once we've set up our scene to track, or we've got hold of the image coming from the camera, and then the plugin has actually identified some key locations in that image that it's going to track, it then runs this enter field of vision here. So whatever function you give it here will then run. When it loses track of those key locations that it found in the video feed, so for example, if you turned your device 180 degrees, you would no longer be looking at the original scene where the key locations were picked up, and then it would run this exit field of vision. So you know whether you're looking at part of the scene where it's got the key locations or not by putting them in here. Okay, so we need to write our own code and then link it back to these tracker objects. So in the hierarchy, let's right click and create an empty object, and I'll call that controller. And then we want to create a new C# script. So over in the project window, create C#, and we'll call that in controller as well. And I'll drag and drop that script and put it onto my controller object that I just created. And there you can see it. So we'll now open up this and edit this file. Okay, so here's some basic code to get us started with a version of this app that we can actually build out and run and test. So I've added in all of the necessary functions that need to be in here for that tracker and that trackable object to call when certain events happen in the plugin. Now, first of all, in your code, you'll need to add in this using Wikitude, so you can use the library functions that belong to that. And I've also added the UI library as well, because I'm going to be linking up some buttons later on. And in fact, I can see I've already forgotten to put that in. So I'll just add it in here, public button tracking control. And then this button here will be the one that we use to turn the tracking on and off. Okay, so the first thing I've got at the top here, I've got a link to our tracker object so that we can manipulate it from inside this code. Then there's a float saying how high the ground level is. Okay, so what's really important to remember is that you're not putting virtual objects into the real 3D world. You're just putting them over the top of a flat image and giving the illusion that they're in the 3D world. So therefore you can change their scale, you can change where the ground is and those types of things to move it around to give the illusion. It's very important to get into your mind that you're not actually putting things into the video. in 3D. They're just sitting above it. Okay, the whole thing is an optical illusion. Now, next we have a grid, which I'll add in a minute. This grid will allow you to actually see where the ground is and give you some kind of a reference of what's going on with the tracking. And I'm creating our own private Boolean value called isTracking that we can control for being true or false as to whether the system is actually tracking or not. And then, of course, we've got our link to the button that I've added. Now, in the awake function, I am creating this grid renderer here by setting it to a grid renderer that is attached to the controller. Now, that's not actually attached as of yet. So let's just save that. And I'll just flick back to Unity. What I'm going to do is, in the hierarchy, select the controller and then look for this grid renderer. It comes with the Wikitude stuff. So if you go to all scripts in the project window, you'll actually be able to find it here. It's a C# file, grid renderer. Drag and drop that onto your controller. While we're here, you can see that the tracker is also required to come through here. So that's this tracker here. We can drag and drop that there. And then we have this tracking control button for turning things on and off. Now, the reason that we have to turn it on and off is because it's not going to find key locations constantly in the entire video feed that we've got. And then once it loses it, get more. That's not the way this is working. So you have to position your device so it's looking at the scene in the video of where you want your augmented object to appear. Then you press start tracking, and at that point it will create key locations so that if you then move your device around that particular area of the video feed, then it will be able to track it from that point. So we do need to be able to turn it on and off. So I'm going to create a button in here. So let's go UI button. And on that button, we'll set the text to tracking. Doesn't really matter what you call it here. And with the button, I'm also going to anchor it up in that top corner and position it in the top corner. And just to make it a little bit neater, I'll just move it down so it's not smack bang up in that top corner there. And to signify that it's actually turned off initially, I'll just change the image color on it to red. Okay, so that's over in the buttons, image controls, and the text there. So that's our button. If we go back to our controller and have a look in the inspector where that tracking control button is being passed through to the script, we can now grab the button and drag and drop it into there. Okay, so now the script will have access to that button. With that done, we can go back to our script and continue working through it. All right, so this grid will now grab our grid that we've attached so that we can display it. Let's go down a little bit. There's now a start tracker function. This start tracker function will be called by our button. So it's going to either turn the tracking on or turn the tracking off. And at the same time, it actually modifies our own local isTracking variable that we created just before. Now, initially, this isTracking value is set to false, and so we're setting it to not what it is. So if it's false, it will become true, and then when it's true, it will become false. Then based on whether we're tracking or not, if it's true, so we do want to start tracking, then we're going to run a set state on our tracker object to instant tracking state.tracking. So that's going to turn on our tracking. Otherwise, if we press the button again, then it will go back to initializing. And this actually puts the tracking into a kind of dormant state, I guess, and it's basically the same as turning it off. Okay, so that's the start tracker. Now to run this function from our button, if we just switch back to Unity, go to our button, and down the bottom of our button in the inspector, there's an on-click area. So we just add something there, and it wants to add the function that's on the controller. So we drag and drop our controller into there, and then we look for that function, which is in the controller code, and it's just off your screen, but I can see it. It's going to be the start tracker function, and you can see it comes up there. If you want to use a function in a button, you have to make sure that it's public and available so that this area can actually see it. Right, so this button will now turn on and off our tracking. All right, let's continue in the code. So after our start tracker function, we then have our event functions that are going to be called by those trackable objects that are in our scene already. So these are the ones here. We've got an on error loading, and you can see that I've just got some debug text in there, just so that they do something. And you can also debug and see which ones are running, I guess, as you're testing it. So there's on error loading. Then we've got our on targets loaded. We've got our on enter field of vision, on exit field of vision, and on state changed. So this on state changed will run when the tracking turns on and off, essentially. Now you'll notice that in this on enter field of vision, I'm running a small function called set scene, and I'm sending it a value of true. And what set scene does is basically at the moment just turn the grid on and off. So set scene, we send it through true, and you can see set scene just right down the bottom here is that the grid will be enabled when on enter field of vision runs, and when on exit field of vision runs, we send a false, and that will turn the grid off so that we can't see it. All right, so these functions, with them now written, we can actually assign them to the trackable objects that are in the hierarchy. So let's just save that, and we'll switch back to our scene and click on the instant tracker in the hierarchy, and these events are the ones we're going to set, and they're all on the controller. So we just put the controller here, there, and there. And then we go and set the functions. So the functions are all named after the actual event types themselves. So we can look down here, we can go into our controller code, and once again, it's just slightly off the screen, but you'll be able to find all the ones that are named after them. So this one's on targets loaded. This one will be on error loading. This one here will be on state changed. And you do exactly the same thing for the child trackable as well. So it's going to get its code from the controller object. And then we'll look for our enter field of vision and our exit field of vision. So here's the app running on a Samsung. It's just one of the original Samsung type phones. It's still got a pretty good processor in it. You can see that, if we turn it around so it thinks it's up the right way, the grid system itself is staying smack bang in the middle of our view, even though it is reacting to the gyroscope. So it can actually modify what the virtual ground plane is with the actual video ground plane. So if that's this black folder sitting on top of this book is the ground, you might want to get this quite low like that so that it's lined up quite nicely before you start tracking. Now, because it's not tracking, that's why that grid is staying stuck to your camera. Let's say we want to line it up with the folder in the book just like that. Yes, this is a bit of shameless advertising for my new book. And I hit the tracking button. You'll see that the grid disappeared for a moment, and that was while the key locations were being set up. Now if we move, notice that that grid's staying nice and steady and attached to that video feed. So it looks like the grid is actually now in the video. And so you can imagine if you've got any characters sitting on that grid, which would be your ground plane, then they're going to look like they're in the video and moving relatively to the video and not your camera movement. Now you can see that it loses the key location sometimes when that grid disappears. So that's the initial setup. It's now working for turning our tracking on and off with our grid as evidence. And in the next video, we will start putting some animated characters into the scene and interacting with the mobile interface.